William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. Welcome to the College of Complexes, being held at Barbeck's Restaurant at 8949 Garland Road, Dallas, Texas. Gently embracing the east side of White Rock Lake. When I entered, I was greeted like coming home to Grandma's house, warm and friendly. When visiting the Barbeck's Restaurant, tell them you want your reservations for the next College of Complex class.
Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 223rd meeting since we started in February of 2009. This actually started in Chicago in 1951 for the purpose of solving all the world's problems. They're still working at it. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue, express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. Then we have questions and answers, not speeches. We have one rule we live up to, and that is only one fool at a time. So don't interrupt the speaker. You'll be reminded of the rule. And then following that, following questions and answers, we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience gets 5 minutes at the podium that wants it to respond to what the speaker said, for or against. And then our speaker gets a comment and close the meeting. That's how it's done. So before we put our speaker on, there are any announcements? Now's the time for announcements. Anybody has any announcements? Do you have any announcements? Any announcements?
I'll make my standard.
Okay.
Hello pitch. Again, welcome in this evening. Glad you were all able to make it out. On a dreary day, it's getting kind of nice out there now, so it's pleasant to be out. But we're glad you're here tonight. Just a reminder that Barbeck's takes good care of us. They don't charge us a fee to use our room, which we appreciate. Many of the restaurants do. And that way Tom can keep the service charge or attendance charge, whatever we might want to call it for the day, that we put in the bucket, and that pays for all of his printing and advertising expenses and that sort of thing. And buying the speaker's dinner. And the speaker if they bring a guest. So we buy some food. But thank you for coming. Please be generous with our server. We've told the restaurant that we'll try to at least, even if we come not too hungry, we'll at least buy $5 worth of something. Whether it's a sandwich or a dessert and a drink or a good full meal. Almost everything they put on the menu is good. If you haven't eaten here, you can do breakfast at night or dinner at night or whatever. And they have a good cook in the kitchen, so take good advantage of that, and hope you enjoy the content tonight, and we'll see your face again. Thanks.
Okay, we have next week, we have what really happened at Waco. Will it happen again? The speaker is sitting right there. That's Stuart Nelson. He's going to talk about that next week. I won't bore you with reading all this. It's the itinerary I handed out to you, so you'll see it right there. On April 19th, we have Is Changing Dallas ISD to a Home Rule District a Bad Idea? That's with Hobie Huckel. He's an organizer, Dallas County Democratic Party, and MoveOn.org. Dallas, that ought to be interesting. It's in front of you. You can read that also. But our speaker tonight is Pat O'Connell. She's going to talk about, can a true skeptic believe in conspiracies? She's an author, communications consultant for high-tech industries. She builds a logical case for even a skeptic's acceptance of some of today's most notable conspiracy claims. Pat will present both a rational and intuitive view of conspiracy issues, including the JFK assassination, chemtrails, mind control, the siege at Waco, the 9/11 attacks, Obama's birth certificate, and the assassination of Osama Bin Laden. And she will describe 3 critical facts that help her eyes to a number of claims that once seemed absurd. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Pat O'Connell.
Thank you. Okay. All right, can you hear me? Okay, well, let's just get started. Can a true skeptic believe in conspiracies? Let me turn on the clicker. The masses have never thirsted after truth. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. The ultimate ignorance is the rejection of something you know nothing about and refuse to investigate. And people are guilty of that on both sides. And my favorite, you can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. And this famous quote by Abraham Lincoln, don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it. So, definitions. What is a conspiracy? It's a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. And what is a skeptic? A person who questions or doubts something. So, now we ask, do conspiracies exist? Again, it's a plan by a group, a secret plan by a group to do something illegal or harmful. Well, we've got just a few examples of real conspiracies. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was secret, designed to do harm on Americans. America's Manhattan Project was a secret project designed to do harm on Japan. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment was a 40-year project, if you guys don't know about that, in which our government, God bless them, decided that they were going to help 600 black men in, I believe it was Alabama, who had syphilis by not treating them and trying to find out what the progression of the disease is. They knew how to treat it, and for 40 years you'd think 600 men later they know what the progression of syphilis looks like. The tobacco industry's decades-long cover-up, we know that, that they knew that it caused cancer, they knew that they were putting addictive materials in it. And then one of my favorites, as you guys probably know who have been here for a long time, as much as I love Big Pharma, Merck's sale of the killer Vioxx, which they made billions on, and they kept selling it when they knew that it was killing people, because they knew that even with the billion-dollar record, industry record payouts for fines and lawsuit settlements, they were still going to make billions off of Vioxx, so they continued doing it. Do cover-ups of conspiracies exist? So we've established that conspiracies really do exist. Do they get covered up? Well, the Robertson panel report, it happens to be something having to do with UFOs, specifically talked about how the government was concerned about mass hysteria, that people who are upset if there were real flying saucers in the air, people being upset could conceivably choke communication channels. It could cause the military to be distracted from real invasions by real aliens, namely Russians at that time. So they recommended a program of disinformation and education in which we would use the media at the time, television, radio, and newspapers, to desensitize people to the whole idea of UFOs and aliens. Operation Mockingbird, I believe it was in the 1950s, was a CIA program in which they bought some of the most respected journalists of the time and used them to preach the gospel according to the CIA. So we know that that happened. And this lovely quote by William Casey, the head of the CIA, 1981, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." This is their goal, so we have no reason to believe that the information we're getting from any channels of communication are true. Skeptic versus cynics or debunkers. So a skeptic by my definition and by some definitions, means that it's somebody who's open. We question, and I consider myself a skeptic. We question things, we dig for evidence, but we're open to being persuaded one way or the other. We might believe the conventional explanation, we might believe the alternative explanation, but we're open. A cynic, on the other hand, believes nobody has noble motives, so they're almost always going to believe the alternative story. And then that's not very clear, a debunker is just the opposite of a cynic. They're convinced that the conventional explanation is always true. They are totally closed to the idea of the alternative explanation and will bend over backwards and make fools of themselves to disprove the conventional explanation, even in the presence of convincing evidence. So, to answer the original question, can a skeptic believe in conspiracies? Yes, because conspiracies really exist, and skeptics are open-minded and open to the evidence. So, really all it takes is credible evidence in a context in which the situation could happen. The pathway from skeptic to believer takes, as I kind of mapped it out, takes 6 steps. Listen to the little voice in your head, triangulate on the stories, look for means, motive, and opportunity, verify logical consistency, vet the evidence where possible, and remain open to new evidence. And I'll go into that in detail. The little voice in your head, that's something that I've experienced over the years. There's just this little sense that something's not right about a story. The explanation that you hear from the mainstream media or from the government or from or just your eyes looking at something and you're thinking, this just doesn't feel right. There's something wrong with this. Second step is to triangulate, and I actually think it's good to quadrangulate, if there is such a thing. So first you check into the conventional story and you find out what they say happened. Then you look at the alternative story, the conspiracist story, and then you look at the debunkers' story, how they're cutting down the conspiracist story. And then the fourth step is something I do, debunk the debunkers. So you go and you look at the holes in the debunking story, and generally there are a bunch of them, because to go back to that definition of the debunkers, they wouldn't accept an alternative explanation if it jumped on them. So next is means, motive, and opportunity. So any crime has to meet these 3 criteria. They have to, the perpetrator has to have the means, motive, and opportunity to have done the crime. Well, in most of these conspiracies, we're looking at government or big business or the military as the perpetrator. Well, do they have the means and the opportunity? Yeah, duh. So, could the government, could the military have pulled off any of the conspiracies that conspiracy people talk about? Absolutely. The JFK assassination, 9/11, the whole 9 yards. The motive was the piece that for me has been hard and is often hard for a lot of people, because we have a hard time accepting that people could do such horrible things to other people, especially their own people. So if we're looking at something like 9/11, it's just so unbelievably hard to imagine that our own people would have done this. It's hard to conceive. So that's the hard part to get past. The second part of motive, though, is to look at who benefits. So the next step in the process is to look at logical consistency. Do all the pieces of the claims make sense? And I mentioned 9/11 versus JFK. In the 9/11 conspiracy story, to me, it seems that all of the pieces, all of the evidence, all of the stories that people tell about what happened on 9/11, what they experienced, and the evidence, all make sense. With JFK, the JFK story, you have so many different alleged perpetrators. You've got the mafia and the Cubans and the CIA and LBJ, and those stories don't all sync up. You have to kind of, either the CIA and LBJ and maybe the mafia did it together, or maybe the mafia and Cuba did it together, but not LBJ and the CIA. But so there's too many moving parts in the JFK story. The comment was made earlier that that may be done for a reason, to create chaos, so that we are kept off of, kept off balance, so that we never stabilize on the real story. Vet the evidence. So you tap your own expertise. If you happen to have expertise in a subject, go find out more about the subject and do your own research. If you don't have expertise in it, go look online or go to the library, or seek out experts you trust who can answer some of the questions. Is this possible? Is this aspect of it real? And then remain open to new information, because I got to a point years ago. I'd spent 10 or 15 years researching the JFK assassination. I was done. I knew all the answers. Not anymore. I'm open again. So now we've got managing the conspiracy reality. Not everything's a conspiracy. I know some people will disagree with me. But sometimes it's just all about corporate profit. I have a client who just laid off or furloughed all the staff over a period of a month, 1 week at a time in waves, just so the bottom line would look good when they closed out their books for the quarter or for the year. Even though we had 4 big proposals that will affect future bottom lines, they furloughed all of these people without pay for a week each. Technology serves a willing market. So we can say that corporate greed is out there creating things and technology that people want to buy and the corporations want to sell because they want to make money. So we've got here video cameras for toll roads and traffic management. We hate those cameras. Big brother. But there are some people, I happen to work for some clients who put in toll roads, and don't hurt me, no tomatoes here. But that's a way some people like those cameras, because it allows folks without toll tags to drive on toll roads, and they just get a nice little bill in the mail that says, hey, you drove on our road, here's a picture of your license plate, send us $5 for the tolls. We've got something called DSRC technology with GPS and GCM, lots of acronyms. DSRC is Dedicated Short Range Communications, GPS, Global Positioning System, and GSM is a type of cellular transmission capability. So I don't know if you can see it, but there are these little signals going around the cars. There was a mandate, I don't know if it was actually executed, but Congress created a mandate that by 2013 all new vehicles manufactured would have this DSRC technology built in. So in other words, every car, if this happened, every car built after 2013 or beginning in 2013 would have a device in it that is capable of communicating with the global positioning satellites and talking to the cellular network. So a cell phone, GPS, and it's connected to the computer in your car. The idea with that is for a couple of reasons. One, for safety, the idea would be that it's vehicle to infrastructure, infrastructure to vehicle, and vehicle to vehicle. Meaning that for example, an ambulance could be coming up to a traffic light or a fire truck, and that device in the truck would talk to the traffic light and tell the traffic light, hey, I'm an emergency vehicle, we're on an emergency situation, we're in an emergency situation, and the traffic light would turn all red so that the vehicle could go through safely and everybody else would stop. The other safety capability would be that your car would sense the proximity of another car, so that if you were about to collide with it, it would give you some kind of warning. Do we like this? Yeah, maybe, and maybe not. It creates the opportunity for somebody to know what you're doing. And then there's the little thing called the progressive snapshot. I don't know if you've seen the commercials, but it plugs into the OBD port, the onboard diagnostic port under your dashboard. And it basically does the same thing as the DSRC that I just talked about, only it's an aftermarket product. For Progressive Insurance, they're using it because it plugs into the onboard diagnostic computer. It has an accelerometer in it and GPS. So it plugs into your car's computer. It can read your speed, it can know when you're braking, those kinds of things. But with the accelerometer, it can also know if you're accelerating fast, at jackrabbit starts, or hard braking, or if you're turning too fast and you're at risk of tipping over. And all of this can tell the insurance company whether you're an aggressive driver or a reckless driver, and then they would give you poorer rates than someone who is who stays under the speed limit, who doesn't drive so recklessly. Do we like that? I don't know. If you had a teenage driver, I happen to work for a client who makes a product like this. If you had a teenage driver, you put one of those things in the car. If your kid doesn't come home when you expect them to come home and you can't get a hold of them on the phone, you can know where they are because you've got the GPS in there. You can know if your kid is driving recklessly, and you can give them extra guidance on driving, or if you're the type of parent who wants to punish them or whatever. So you've got some good things that can be done. Fleet owners will know whether they've got drivers who are wasting gas by again, driving aggressively or whatever. So it's got a good side, it's got a bad side. Same with cell phones. Our cell phones, we love the fact that they've got GPS in them and can tell us where to go and how to get there, and that we can find people. But again, it means somebody, that information is going to the internet, that information is going to the big eye in the sky. So even though these things are done for commercial reasons and people willingly pay for them, and companies do them for corporate greed, Big Brother can take advantage of these technologies. They can get images that are taken from the toll roads or from traffic cameras. They can use the information from your GPS and from your phone. So can the government use that information for unsavory purposes? Absolutely. And they probably are. The question is, would you give up all of your wireless technology for your privacy or for world peace? I don't know that there are many people who would give that up. So the question is, how concerned are you about it? You're complicit in creating this environment where Big Brother can watch what you're doing and know what's going on with you. So until the time when we're willing to give that technology up, we're complying, we're participating in the problem. So now we have the smackdown, conspiracists versus the skeptics. Why do conspiracists find it so hard to break through to us skeptics? You feel like you're beating your head against a brick wall. Sometimes there's several reasons. Some of the things that I noted, that sometimes this conspiracists come across with an aggressive or negative energy. It's like, and I don't blame them, because they're angry about these things that are being committed on the population. But being angry at me is not going to persuade me to look at your evidence, to open my mind to your way of looking at something. The second one is the package deal problem. If I believe in, let's say I believe that 9/11 was an inside job, the idea is with the package deal that if I believe one thing, I have to believe in UFOs and chemtrails and all of the gamut of things. And That's not necessarily true for a lot of people. Some people may be open to believing that 9/11 was an inside job, but they don't want to be within 10 miles of UFO nuts. Yeah, that's not me, okay. Sometimes the conspiracists disrespect our need to question, vet the evidence, and find the logic. Sometimes it's, well, just believe us. You know, here's all this evidence. Well, okay, I appreciate this, but I've got to go vet it. Obviously, there aren't enough lifetimes to do that. In some cases, we feel as if we don't believe enough. Let's say, for example, 9/11, and I use this example a lot. Let's say I believe 9/11 was an inside job, but there's 5,000 individual pieces of evidence. I may not believe all 5,000 pieces of evidence. I still believe that 9/11 was an inside job. Closed to disproving any of their evidence. This kind of goes back to the other thing. If there are pieces of the 5,000 pieces of evidence that I can explain away in my mind using the conventional explanations, I would like for the conspiracists to be as open to that possibility as they ask me to be open to their realities. And the last one, it's a real problem, and it's kind of part of one of my worst fears in the world, which is being falsely accused and the facts don't matter. For every 1,000 experts the conspiracists can put up to prove their case, the government, the powers that be, whoever are the perpetrators can match you and double it. So you can't, it's the war of the experts. They can come up with experts to counter your experts. So that's a very real problem. Suggestions for conspiracists, how to move us skeptics toward your way of thinking. Be patient with us. Be mellow and just kind of ping us a little bit over time and pick just a few pieces of the most important information that you think crack the shell, the things that if these 3 things are true, the whole house of cards falls apart. So just bring those to us and just chip away at us a little at a time. We'll get there. Respect our belief in some claims and rejection of others. So if I believe in 9/11, don't make me have to believe in UFOs or the Easter Bunny. Respect our need for research and logic. Celebrate the small victories. If I say, I think you're absolutely right that the Pentagon was an inside job, but I don't believe the whole 9/11 conspiracy, celebrate that. Work with that. And be open to the possibility that some pieces of your evidence may turn out to have conventional explanations, and yet the overall story is still true. It still was an inside job. It still was a conspiracy. It was still a horrific thing, even if some pieces of evidence that you thought were compelling turn out to be no big deal. And then point us to experts we feel comfortable with. It still comes down to the battle of the experts, but if you can find somebody or some people, if you can connect us up with experts that we feel comfortable with, that will help move us along. So here's my journey, and I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna use the 9/11 conspiracy as an example. First of all, vetting me, am I a true skeptic? Well, I question everybody, including myself. My grandfather taught me to believe none of what I hear and only half of what I read. I take it one step further. I believe half of what I read or I believe none of what I read and only half of what I see, because I believe that I am capable of misunderstanding things. I am capable of misprocessing things, misinterpreting things. Your eyes can deceive you, your mind can deceive you. So I think, excuse me, I think it's good to question. Thank you. So it's good to question everything. And for years I subscribed to the Skeptical Inquirer, which is the journal for the skeptics. The organization was called SICOP, Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. So these are the skeptics of all skeptics, and I subscribed to their journal, not because I really wanted to hear about all their debunking, but I wanted to debunk their debunking. I can't tell you how many times I saw studies that they reported on, and when they took the study results and crunched the numbers, they totally skewed the stories. So the skeptics are just as bad as everybody else at manipulating the data. Am I a true skeptic? Yes, but I'm open to extraordinary possibilities. So now we're talking about the 9/11 conspiracy. Were the 9/11 attacks a conspiracy? And in this picture, let's see, whoops, no, come back. Ah, there we go. Where's my little pointer? There's the pointer. Okay, here's building 1, building 2, and building 7. As you can see, this is building 7. It's across the street with building 6 in between. It was not hit by a plane. It was not hit by falling debris, and yet it fell down pretty much exactly the same way buildings 1 and 2 did. Something's not right with that. Okay. So, does anybody think that 9/11 was not a conspiracy? Raise your hand if you think 9/11 was not a conspiracy. By anyone?
By the people who did it.
By the people who did it. Okay. So here's how I came to believing in the 9/11 conspiracy. First, with the voice in my head, the things that really didn't feel right to me. The first thing was that there were no pictures, no video footage from the Pentagon. The most protected building arguably in the United States, and we have not seen one photograph, not one piece of footage of a plane coming at this building. Something's radically wrong with that, and no debris to speak of. It's like token debris there. 3 steel buildings succumb to fire for the first time. Steel buildings burn everywhere else, burn for hours and hours, days and days, and never fall down. We had a situation where 3 buildings, 2 were hit by planes, a third, we don't know why it started on fire, building 7. All 3 of those buildings came down. 3 buildings collapsed as if in a controlled demolition. And anybody who's seen footage of this, well, we all saw buildings 1 and 2 collapse straight down into their own footprints. Hallmark of a controlled demolition. The fact that the 2 of them came down right in their own footprints was just defied the odds. I mean, the fact that a plane hit and effectively decapitated both of them, you would expect the top to tip over and then maybe the rest of it would fall down, or maybe the rest of it would stay standing and the tops would fall off. The fact that both of these buildings came straight down made no sense. And then building 7, the destruction of that is just like what we've all seen with casinos and other buildings where demolition experts have planted charges, caves in, straight down, again, in its own footprint. Another thing that just did not feel right, Larry Silverstein was the leaseholder for the World Trade Center buildings. And he said, and I'll get into this in a little more detail, that they made the decision to pull the building, meaning building 7. Some people will say that pull the building is a controlled demolition term. It doesn't, I don't need that for this to be fishy to me. That if that building was on fire and it was about to come down because of the fire, if it was so destabilized that it was coming down because of the fire, then there is no deciding what to do with the building. They could decide to remove people from the building. They could decide to evacuate the area. They could decide a lot of things, but they could not decide what to do with that building unless they had demolition charges planted in it. The next one was that all the crime scenes were sanitized. How many remember, I mean, we've seen plane crashes and the shuttle disaster where crews spend months with a fine-tooth comb picking up all the pieces, the smallest little pieces, then they go into a big hangar type place and they reconstruct that plane. They want to know what happened. All the crime scenes at 9/11, bulldozed, sanitized, all the evidence gone. Something is totally wrong with this when the worst attack on U.S. soil is never investigated properly and all the evidence is carted away like that. And the fact that this is kind of related, the fact that we spent $13 million on the Columbia shuttle investigation, $79 million on the Monica Lewinsky investigation, but only $15 million on the worst attack on U.S. soil ever. And the fact that we blamed Al-Qaeda for the attacks, but we went to war with somebody else. Made no sense at all to me. Triangulating on the stories, because the evidence is destroyed, it's going to be next to impossible to do the kind of vetting, the kind of investigation I would like done or would like to do. The 9/11 Commission ignored numerous witnesses, never even spoke to them. Bush and Cheney, as far as I've been able to track down, testified for 1 hour before two people on the commission, the top two people on the commission, and their testimony was off the record or kept secret, and some of you got not under oath. Okay. Architects and engineers, pilots and military, there are thousands and thousands of people who would know better, who believe this was staged. Or that the alleged perpetrators could not have done what the cover story says that they did. The Popular Mechanics did a debunking job, and I happened to read that article with the debunking, and Popular Mechanics left huge holes in the story that they didn't even address conveniently. Some of the key pieces of information they didn't even bother to talk about. So it's, again, you know, they talked about the things that they could debunk and didn't address some of the things that could be showstoppers. And the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, issued a report, and it too, I haven't read it, but from what I understand through the engineers and architects and people who have vetted it, who are qualified to vet it, that it too was full of holes, that it ignored certain pieces of information, and you guys can probably address some of that later. Means, motive, and opportunity. Did insiders have means and opportunity? Absolutely. Motive. This was the hard part for me to get through, and some of you guys in this room kept pounding on me. You gotta, it was an inside job. You gotta look at the evidence. You've gotta look at the videos. But my head just I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that our people would have done such a horrible thing to our own citizens. So I had to look at who would have done it and why. And I'm still having trouble explaining to people why these three pieces of information unlocked my brain on that, but they worked toward the motive aspect. Learning about the Federal Reserve System. Lloyd Chappelle did a fabulous talk here at CFC on the Federal Reserve System, which sometimes people call the Federal Reserve Bank. It's not a bank, it's not federal, and it has no reserves. False flag attacks was the second piece of the puzzle, and shock doctrine, or something called disaster capitalism. So, the Federal Reserve System, what I learned about that is that it's a private bank, not controlled by the government. It prints fake money, but it makes money by loaning that money out and earning real money on interest. So they never want those loans to be paid off, because those loans are a fake money. The real money they're making is from the interest. So they want to keep the people paying that interest indefinitely. And they are private bankers who control our economy. I'll let somebody else take it to the next level and discuss the fact that they're connected with an international cabal of bankers that control the world economy. Okay, false flag attacks. And if anybody doesn't know what false flag attacks are, it's where, for example, our government attacks somebody else or our own people, and then blames it on a specific victim or a specific enemy that they want us to be mad at. And they do that to justify going to war or whatever their aims are. Examples of false flag attacks, I couldn't find any that were actually implemented, and you guys may have some, but there are two pieces of evidence that indicate that that false flag attacks were recommended. Project Northwoods in 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the DoD wanted to give us a reason to attack Cuba. So they were going to hijack or shoot down U.S. military or passenger planes, sink a U.S. ship near Cuba, or destroy U.S. aerial drones by aircraft disguised as Cuban MiGs. President Kennedy rejected that plan, but still, his top advisors were recommending it, and I think it's reasonable to assume that if we know about this, it's the tip of the iceberg, and that there are probably numerous situations where the president actually authorized operations like this, and we haven't heard about them because they've been kept top secret and classified. In 2003, there was a Bush-Blair memo in which they proposed to paint a U-2 spy plane with UN colors and fly it low over Iraq and let Saddam Hussein shoot it down, and then that would provide a reason for us to go to war with Iraq, which we wanted to do anyway. And the fact that when 9/11 happened, we said these guys did it, but we're going to go attack Iraq. So we were just looking for a reason to go to Iraq and attack them. But why? So the question I keep coming back to is why? Motive. Then I learned about the shock doctrine, a book called Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, and I recommend you guys read it. The principle is that when a shock occurs, whether it's political or economic or military or a natural disaster, people become malleable and they're willing to accept solutions that otherwise would be anathema to them, that they would just consider horrific. It's a principle similar to what MK Ultra, and that's another conspiracy which has come out in the congressional record. But there was a group of scientists, the worst of which was Ewan Cameron, and the idea was that you repeatedly shock people, physical electroshock therapy, to scramble their brains and their will and make them more susceptible to programming in whatever message or whatever behaviors you think you would like them to exhibit. Turned out that didn't work so well, but the idea with the shock doctrine is that you can do this to a whole culture. And while those people are destabilized, the Chicago School of Economics and Milton Friedman, who was the head guru, teaches their disciples to be ready to impose disaster capitalism on the populations that are destabilized by shock. So what that means is, while whether it's a natural disaster or a military coup or a bombing or whatever, the idea is that people are so freaked out and in chaos that they will be willing to listen to anybody who has an idea for how to put their civilization back together again, how to make sense of their world again. And so the Chicago School of Economics, the Chicago boys, what they want to do is, while the population is all in chaos, bring in this, what they call disaster capitalism, sell off all the country's assets to typically foreign investors at a cheap price. And so somebody else comes in, takes over their mining or their oil and gas resources or whatever they happen to have, and now the people in that country have no jobs. The country doesn't own their resources, and the people who do jack up the prices. It's just terrible, but somebody's making a lot of money on it, and it's on purpose. So the disaster capitalists knew that if you had a shock that happened, you could jump right in, and you could, while people were all, I don't know what to do, you could come in and take over all their assets. But they said, well, why should we wait for a disaster to happen? Let's just make one happen. So I believe it started in the 50s. The CIA started working with people in Chile, and the Chicago boys were training up economists in college to follow the Chicago School of Economics, to follow the shock doctrine, disaster capitalism principles. So in the 1970s, by this point, the CIA and a bunch of a coalition of big business leaders in the U.S. had invested millions of dollars trying to get rid of Allende, the president in Chile, who was a very socialist president, and he nationalized a lot of the industry and the resources there. And so the capitalists back in the U.S. didn't like that, because it was AT&T and I forget a bunch of the other ones whose names you would know, and they didn't like the fact that their investments were becoming nationalized. So they were looking, the CIA and these capitalists were looking for somebody who could knock Allende off his pillar. And they finally found Pinochet, and his military coup took place on, wait for it, 9/11, 1973. I don't think that's a coincidence. So, talking about motive, who benefited from 9/11? Well, the cover story says it was Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden. Why? Because they hated our freedom, and because they were on a holy war against us for supporting anti-Muslim activities overseas. So in particular, the Russians, the Indians, and the Jews. But they didn't drive any planes into Russian buildings or Indian buildings or Israeli buildings. So this doesn't make any sense. And here's a quote by the FBI Chief of Investigative Publicity in 2006. The reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama Bin Laden's most wanted page is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting Bin Laden to 9/11. Who's the poster child for the cover story? Bin Laden was the leader who instigated the attacks on the U.S. Who benefited? Now we're into the alternative stories. Who benefited? Who could have benefited from the alternative side? Well, let's look at the Fed and the bankers, investors. Well, by attacking us on 9/11, they got distractions from their illegal predatory practices, credit default swaps and derivatives. They got lenient or no prosecution for their crimes. And in 2008, the Fed threatened stock market disaster and implosion and imposition of martial law if the members of Congress did not authorize $850 billion bailout for the banks. Yeah, could be just a coincidence.
The day before 9/11, Rumsfeld, you know about that?
You can tell, and we've got some. I've got some handouts that might cover some of this stuff. Who else benefited? The capitalists and the intelligence community. I just learned about this thanks to Joe's presentation a few weeks ago about 9/11. Project Hammer in September of 1991, H.W. Bush and a cabal of intelligence spooks and bankers got together and took out $240 billion in securities, 10-year securities, which came due September 12th, 2001. What did they do with all this money? Well, they invested it in the recently broken up Russia, which was the Soviet Union. They raped the Russian assets for profit. So disaster capitalism, the capitalists went in and they started selling off, especially oil and gas resources, to Western capitalists, to businesses. But that's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. So there's some money laundering involved. Well, the organizations that were investigating, and there were multiple organizations investigating these money laundering charges, conveniently were decimated in the 9/11 attacks. Whole chains of command were wiped out with one building's destruction. So on 9/11, the Fed invoked its emergency powers. I'm not sure what they did with it that was untoward, and maybe some of you guys know, but the thing that I thought was really interesting is that on 9/14, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, for the first time ever, invoked its emergency powers to suspend the normal regulations for clearing these types of securities so that H.W. Bush and the cabal of bankers and spooks didn't have to answer questions about their money laundering activities. These rules were suspended for 15 days only. Isn't that convenient? Okay, so those folks benefited. Did the government and military benefit? Well, you tell me. The Patriot Act got shoved through. We lost a ton of our rights and liberties. Gave the government and the military unprecedented and unchecked power to abuse us. And eventually the NDAA included this nice little language. The disposition of a person under the law of war may include the following: detention under the law of war without trial until the end of the hostilities authorized by the authorization for use of military force. In other words, they can now arrest us for no reason and keep us locked up with no recourse. They don't have to give us a trial. They don't have to give us a lawyer. So they won. Did big business benefit from this? Well, we got a privatized war, first one ever that is virtually completely privatized. Our own soldiers were incidental. They hardly got equipment and body armor or anything to do their jobs. But the Halliburton guys, the Blackwater guys, they got everything they needed. And of course, we paid them 3 times what we were paying our soldiers. These privatized military organizations, companies, were now being hired to make messes in countries like Iraq, and then they were hired to clean them up. They're now being hired to take over the government, local government. Some cities are saying, "Oh, we don't want to mess with governing our own city. We'll just hire Halliburton to do that." And then professional prepping, doomsday for elite communities. This upset me because if things really are as bad as some folks think they are, I see two ways of addressing it. One, you can try to fix the problem. Two, you can create your own little community that's insulated from this crap. Well, in this scenario, if you're in a rich community and you're hiring Halliburton or Blackwater to maintain your security, the security of your community, then my little community over here, where we're just gardening and have aquaponics and things like that, they can come and take whatever we have, whatever they want. So that disturbs me too. Who benefited? Larry Silverstein, the World Trade Center leaseholder. I didn't realize until yesterday or today that he signed the lease 6 weeks before 9/11. And he took out insurance on the buildings. The buildings were, the occupancy rates were low, there were maintenance issues, they needed to upgrade the fireproofing, which some of the other folks can talk about, that those tasks or those requirements were used as an excuse to bring people in that could have, yeah, Joe, you'll get your turn later. Make notes. So he was paid out $4.1 billion in insurance payments for a man who owned who leased the building for 6 weeks before 9/11, and he tried to sue the United and American, the airlines that crashed into the towers, for another $8 billion, but he didn't win that one. So here's his quote. I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire, and I said, we've had such terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse. Now, pulling the building, as I'm told, is a term used in controlled demolition. Even without that word, even without that term, first of all, if you were saying, which as he claims, well, I just meant we were going to pull the firefighters out of the building. At that point in time, there were no firefighters in the buildings. So his saying that they decided to pull the building is such a red flag to me, because there's no deciding to do anything to that building at that point. The building was on fire. It was going to do whatever it did, whatever it was going to do, and there was no decision to be made about what was going to happen to that building unless they had explosives in there that they could set off on cue. So, as far as the logical consistency requirement for me, do all the parts of the 9/11 conspiracy fit together? Yes, they do. To me, it makes sense because of who benefits, and there are numbers of people who all got paid off after this happened. They got whatever benefits they were looking for out of this deal. Vet the evidence, well, there's not enough lifetimes to go look into all the pieces of this puzzle, but I look at the stories of trusted experts. Yes, I go back to the war of the experts, and the government can trot out as many experts saying the opposite of these guys, but we've got architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth, scholars for 9/11 Truth, and you guys can, there's a laundry list of reputable people who are on board with this. So today, remain open to new evidence today. I believe in the 9/11, I believe the 9/11 attacks were conspiracy. I believe they were an inside job. I couldn't tell you exactly who did it, but I believe that knowing who benefited from it is the smoking gun. There are too many things that smelled fishy. The means, motive, and opportunity of the accused perps are just so thin that the only reason we bought the cover story, oh, these horrible Muslims killed us, was because of our xenophobia, our fear of people who are not like us. So they took advantage of our fears to say, oh yeah, they're different, so they must be awful, so they must have done this. no evidence, no real motive. That's the only reason that they give us for what they did. The alternative perps have tons of motive and opportunity and means. The claims are logically consistent throughout the story, and there are too many credible people telling consistent stories that either have to be wildly mistaken, confused, or just flat out lying in order for the cover story to be true. And what's interesting about most conspiracy situations and the debunkers is that the debunkers never come right out and call people liars. And I think there's probably a reason for that, because if they did, they'd be exposed. So they just try to create this confusion. There's a debunker who goes after the UFO stories, and there's one guy who said he stood right next to this craft on the ground, touched it, drew pictures of it, and the debunker says, oh, you were confusing that for the lighthouse, the light from the lighthouse. That's insane. The debunker has to call this man a liar, and he never does. So we need to avoid the comfort zone. What I see happening in our country is like the frog in the pot of boiling water. If you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out. If you put a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly turn up the heat, it'll stay in there until it cooks itself to death. That's where we are. And so I think that we have to continually stay out of the comfort zone. We have to not let this happen, where we become so desensitized to outrageous things that we go, oh, it's just another thing, yeah, whatever. Famous conspiracies, I'll just go through these real quick. How am I doing? JFK assassination, like I said, I spent 15, 20 years reading everything I could find. I was done. I knew exactly how it happened. LBJ did it, or he was the ringleader. Anyway, time passed. I learned new things. My hair's on fire. So I'm open again. I'm learning new things, and I don't know what happened. I don't have an opinion as to who did what. I do think LBJ was involved, and I I absolutely think that there was a conspiracy. The thing that felt fishy about the JFK assassination to me was Ruby's assassination of Oswald. That just made no sense to me. Mind control, I'm totally 100% believing that it was done. I happen to have friends in the national labs who have told me about some of the technology that they personally worked on or were aware of in other teams, one of which involves using kind of a triangulation of signals to plant sounds in an individual's head. So I could be standing right next to you and they would be beaming this signal, only I would hear it. You wouldn't hear it if you were standing right next to me. And another technology they've developed is the ability to blank out your memory for a period of time. So those of you who are familiar with abduction experience, alien abduction experiences, know about the missing time phenomenon. This technology could conceivably be an explanation for how that happens. Chemtrails, I haven't vetted it. I think that I know enough pilots who can tell me that on certain days your plane leaves a trail across the sky, another day it doesn't, depending on which altitude you're at. On the other hand, do I believe that the government is capable of spraying something on us to make us stupid or sick, or just for an experiment? Absolutely, and we've got handouts to show that our government has in fact sprayed stuff on populations. And we've also used aerial spraying to manipulate the ionosphere for communications purposes, and we've used it for weather modification. So yeah, we're doing stuff. Are we doing it every third day when we see all those stripes across the sky? I don't think so. Smart meters, that happens to be something that I have some expertise in, radio frequency technology. I drilled down into that. I could not find any mechanism by which these smart meters could do appreciably more damage than the cell phones that we hold up to our heads for hours and hours a day, or the microwaves we use in our houses. So yeah, probably not good for you, especially if you're living in an apartment complex and your bed is right on the opposite side of the wall from all of the meters for the whole complex. Maybe, but they're directional antennas, so they're beaming out there. Again, conspiracists might say that, well, they're not directional antennas, or they are pointing at the people. I happen to think, I've dismissed that, barring additional information. UFOs, absolutely, I think the possibility is out there. I think that there's a lot of disinformation that's being spread. When the incident at Stephenville happened and Phoenix, the conventional explanation was, oh, what you saw were flares. I personally believe that if a real UFO, a real alien spacecraft flew over an area, it would behoove our government or the powers that be, as part of that disinformation campaign recommended by the Robertson panel, it would behoove them to then send planes out, drop flares, take pictures of them, have experts say, yeah, I saw flares that night. So therefore, you have credible witnesses who say we saw flares, and you can discount all the people who saw the actual craft. So I think that's really going on. Fluoride, that's a slam dunk. Fluoride is a poison. It's a byproduct of nuclear weapons manufacture and aluminum manufacturing. And somebody said, hey, we've got to do something with this garbage. Rather than polluting areas, let's sell it to cities and have them put it in the water, because this poison can help prevent cavities. So, you know, what, 50 years later, we're still putting poison in our water. Situation at Waco, I don't know what happened, but the red flag for me was tanks at this situation. Never before had I ever seen a situation, even if there was, and Stuart's going to talk about this next week, but even if there was child molestation going on, tanks, really? That totally didn't fit. So, and the real story that we'll hear from Stuart next week is just heartbreaking. The Bush-Gore election, who didn't think that was screwy? I mean, really. Obama's birth certificate, I personally think the office of president doesn't have that much power, so I don't care. But I do think it's fishy that if he had a real birth certificate, why on earth drag it out and create such controversy? So, you know, some people consider this the high point of their lives. To me, we've got bigger fish to fry. And the last one is Bin Laden's assassination and burial at sea. Now, that just felt wrong on so many levels. But it was just so strange that this person from a landlocked country would be buried at sea, you know, that we're honoring his traditions. Well, from what I've read, the tradition would have been that he should have been buried with his head facing Mecca. But I don't know. Hey, but here's, and this is ugly, but if you look at this picture, this is Bin Laden. This is the Bin Laden dead picture. This is a dead guy. But the nose down is Bin Laden over here. The nose up is this guy. There is no question in my mind that this is photoshopped. So was Bin Laden even killed then? There are those who will say he had been dead for years. And besides, the FBI didn't even care because they couldn't connect him to the 9/11 attacks anyway. So this is one that we came across just recently. We saw a talk by Dr. Sam Osmanagit, I can't even say it, Osmanagit, about the Bosnian pyramids. He's discovered the world's largest pyramids in Bosnia, and this is not a visible beam, but they've discovered a 28 kilohertz signal emanating from the center of this pyramid in Bosnia, and it's counterintuitive in that the signal gets stronger the farther away from the pyramid you go. The Egyptologists, there were lots of people who came here to Bosnia to vet this excavation and were impressed, went back to Egypt. Zahi Hawass, who was the minister of Egyptology for years and maybe back in, he was thrown out for a while, very dramatic, very egotistical. He convened a meeting of various ministers in Egypt and said, holy crap, if there's a bigger pyramid in Bosnia, people aren't going to come to Egypt. It's going to ruin our tourism. We've got to do something about this. So they began a disinformation campaign. People who went to Bosnia and vetted the pyramid suddenly couldn't get work, were discredited as experts. So we don't know. I haven't vetted this, but it's fascinating. It's a fascinating story. So here's a little quote to leave you with. The business of the journalists is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it and I know it, and what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. And this is a quote by a man named John Swinton, a prominent New York journalist in 1880. Now, I first found this claiming to be a quote by John Swinton, editor of the New York Times, speaking to the New York Press Club, and I started to vet the quote and found out that no, he wasn't the editor of the New York Times. This didn't happen in the 2000s. It happened in the 1800s. And yes, he said this. So we have the same problem we've had for centuries. And this too was an example of manipulation and that I had to vet to find out where it really came from. So that's the end of my talk. Questions and answers, and I'd like to know your stories. And Stuart's got the handouts. I've got one handout that is a list of real conspiracies just in the realm of government experimentation on its own people. The other one is a list of the top, 10 maybe anomalies associated with the 9/11 events. Questions?
I have to admit, you've done such a wonderful job, I am questionless. But I thought that was worthy of note. Does anyone have a question?
Well, of late, so much has been spoken on the news about children with autism. Mm-hmm. Have you done any studies on that, or what do you think?
The vaccines.
The fluoride could even.
It could be the fluoride. It could be the vaccines. I have not vetted it, but I know that the vaccines supposedly had mercury in them, and some of the folks here can probably tell you more about that. And then the claims were that, well, the mercury's not in the vaccines anymore. Well, now there's some other substance that just changed the name. Okay. Yeah.
Do you know any more about the poisons and fluoride? Who's being poisoned and
Fluoride is a poison. It's a neurotoxin.
And how does it affect the people? I mean, everybody's getting it.
Right.
How does it affect
Well,
us?
I don't know exactly, but neurotoxins can just damage your brain. There are a lot of neurotoxins in, like flavorings in foods. Monosodium glutamate it's a natural substance, but it's in your body, it's in your foods. Your brain uses it to stimulate your brain cells, but if you overload your brain with it, it literally stimulates your brain cells to death. So it kills off brain cells. So maybe that's the mechanism of the fluoride. I don't really know. There are others who can speak to that issue, I'm sure.
Well, I could name a few things that fluoride does.
Okay.
There's a recent study from Harvard University says that said that as of 2006 they determined that fluoride was a deadly poison and that it needed to be looked into and removing that from all our water everywhere. That report came out about 2 weeks ago. Another, fluoride causes a lowering of IQ, causes people to be dull. Causes fluoridosis of the teeth and bones, which it makes both teeth and bones brittle. And another is that it is a proven carcinogen. And those three are enough. Calcifies the
It's on the right.
in the brain.
On the right side.
The Lancet Journal,
On the side
which
near
is one of the most esteemed medical journals respected in the world, came out with an article on the neurotoxicity of fluoride and several other common chemicals that we encounter, and mentioned that those played a role, the study showed they played a role in both ADD and Alzheimer's.
Okay.
I got a question.
Yeah. Stuart.
From your point of view up there, we can see everything. How much fluoride did you watch the people ingest just now?
We don't know if the water was filtered.
Take a guess.
Other questions? Okay, we have one up here.
Okay, I've got two of the latest conspiracy. I just heard it yesterday, is that a Chinese man whose son was... Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. A Chinese man whose son was on the Philippine flight claims that the plane has disappeared, but he claims that it's landed somewhere, and the Philippine government is keeping it, a secret, and he fully believes that his son is still alive.
The Malaysia flight?
Yeah.
See, that's one of those things that feels fishy to me, and because of what we've seen happen in the past, I'm asking myself what else is going on in the world that we're not hearing about in the news because of that story taking all the airtime. Are we being distracted by, oh, look over there, there's a squirrel, are we being distracted so that we don't pay any attention to something even worse that's being done over here? So, was there even a flight? Yeah.
Okay, the next question is something that you brought up on here.
Mm-hmm.
The Tony Blair, George W. Bush
Memo?
memo. Well,
Mm-hmm.
there's a committee, a parliamentary committee, and I guess you guess from the way I speak, I'm a limey. The parliamentary committee in England is called the Lord Chilcot, it's called Chilcot. It's the Chilcot report.
Mm-hmm.
He's been investigating the Iraq War for about 3 years now. And it cannot be published because the American government, i.e. George W. Bush, will not allow the 25 memos between Tony Blair and George Bush to be made public. So I personally, just little me, I went to the George Bush Library, filed a Freedom of Information
Good for you.
claim and said, I want the 25 memos from between Bush, Blair, before, during, and after the Iraq War. Now, I figured they'd just throw it in the garbage and forget about it, but I got a big, long, I can show it you on my iPad if you want, a big, long explanation from them, and they said, eventually we'll get round to your question, and when we do this, you can come in and read it and make copies for 25 cents a piece, blah, blah, blah. But of course, I know they're not going to give them.
Well, they might,
anyway.
they might give it to you, but 90% of it will be redacted.
Yeah.
Blacked out, so.
So, you know, that's interesting. The other interesting thing, I'm from a town called Blackburn in England, which is 25% Muslim now. And the member of parliament for that town is called Jack Straw, Jack the Rat we call him. He was the foreign secretary under Tony Blair.
Okay.
And I actually had a discussion with him about the Iraq War, and he also sent Pinochet back to Chile when he was foreign secretary, when he was home secretary for the in the Blair government. But the Lord Chilcot report, it should have been published in a couple of months after the thing, but it's been 3 years. It's cost £25 million, and George Bush is preventing it from being published.
Yep. Other questions? No questions? Okay, now it's, hey, how are you? Done with questions? All right, is it time? Oh.
You were
Gary?
talking
Yes.
about false flag
Yes.
situations. The Gulf of Tonkin was very well documented that was a false flag that we did, so we would attack them.
I started to put the Gulf of Tonkin incident in there, and when I was trying to vet it, it looked like there was an actual attack the day before. The second day, it seemed as if it was just kind of, the evidence wasn't there that there was an attack, and we claimed that there was, or there was some confusion. So I couldn't vet it at that point. If you've got more information.
I don't have any personal information that I have read, but when the information came to me, the Pentagon said that yes, we did shoot our own ship.
Okay.
And yes, we did have that happen, so that we would have a reason to go in there.
Okay. And that is the hallmark of a false flag attack.
And on the Gulf of Tonkin, I've got a okay, let me back up. Concerning the Gulf of Tonkin, when I was in elementary school, I had to write a report on the Gulf of Tonkin. I was in elementary school. I made an A on the paper, but it said the United States Navy, the USS, what was the name of the two ships? Yeah, USS Maddox was viciously attacked by the North Vietnamese Navy. Let me stop for a second and think about the North Vietnamese Navy. Does that sound like a world threat? I don't know. I'm thinking maybe a PT boat, maybe some canoes.
Powerful pea shooters.
Pea shooters, you know, and shooting their AK-47. Maybe they had those, but anyway, and I've still got that paper at home. I'll try and find it. And it's at my mom's house, but you know, just getting back to the Gulf of Tonkin deal, and most people don't know what got us into the Vietnam War. Bottom line for me, and what Pat was presenting, is our troops are stuck in a meat grinder for corporate profit. We need to bring them home, and we need to arrest and get justice for the we need to arrest the criminals that start this crap. Whether we're Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. They're sending our troops to a meat grinding for corporate profit, and we need to, when the conversation comes up, we've got to speak up. We can be nice about it, but we've got to stop the hero stuff. No, they're victims. Anyway.
I was going to make a comment on this, but I think I can really pose it as a question for your response. Is in my understanding of Perry Mason, when you look at a crime, when you're trying to figure out the whole thing going on with a crime, one of the most important points, really, is who manages the cover-up. Can you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think that I addressed several pieces of that. The fact that the CIA, again, tip of the iceberg, bought journalists back in the 50s. Were openly buying journalists and spreading their gospel through the owned media. And then the quote from the 1880s about the media: journalists do not report the news. I don't think anything has really changed. So the cover-ups continue today. The media is complicit. The government is complicit. Big business is complicit. Everybody who's benefiting is complicit.
Well, I think it's actually pretty more serious than just complicit when you are talking about the deaths of near 3,000 people. Then actually what you're talking about is more, I mean, almost directly the same reference would be to a getaway car. The driver of the getaway car. They may not have actually perpetrated the crime, but they are actively engaged in covering the trail for those who did. And just your response on that.
Well, and that actually comes back to the thing that kept me from opening my mind to this concept in the first place. Why would somebody do this kind of thing? And we've talked about the fact that they don't see the victims as humans. It's like, do you feel guilty if you step on a stream of ants on the sidewalk? They don't feel guilty. I don't think they have a sense, they don't see us as human beings. They see us as parts of a machine that need to be managed.
Back to Stewart's comment about the Vietnam War and the Maddox. I guess he didn't say McNamara. Just to be clear, McNamara confessed recently on his deathbed 50 years later that the Maddox never happened. It's not like saying canoes and pea shooters. There was no attack according to the man who released the report. So McNamara was Secretary of Defense at the time. He's the one who said, this is why we got to go to war. Our boys have been attacked. On his deathbed, he very clearly said, I made that up and I'm sorry. So look into that. I just wanted to add weight to that little side thing.
Yeah, and I think the only reason I was bringing up the Gulf of Tonkin in the official story, because that's the official story. The USS Maddox was viciously attacked by the North Vietnamese Navy. So we're going to go kill 2 million Vietnamese and 60,000 of our own boys. Or if that story was even true, and it's not even true. Just like the official story of 9/11. Osama Bin Laden in a cave in Afghanistan with a laptop computer and a satellite phone pulled off 9/11.
But the FBI doesn't.
But the FBI doesn't have any evidence on it.
For him.
But you know, they keep saying that over and over again. Now let's remember one more thing. If you can probably comment on. Okay, let me back up. 3 months before 9/11 happened, CNN, NBC, CBS, Fox News, all those networks were putting on propaganda about the Afghanistan Taliban beating their women I mean, it was just wall-to-wall coverage. Look at these horrible men and they showed one video. Maybe they are. Maybe it was real. This man hitting a woman with a stick. Maybe that really happened. I don't know. But that's the one thing they kept showing over and over again, so that we'd be mad at Afghanistan. The propaganda setting us up. Propaganda setting us up, and then bang, 9/11 happens, and within 15 minutes they know it's Osama bin Laden. So, as Democrats, as Republicans, we got to stop being Democrats and Republicans and be Americans.
Well, and I think that propaganda set us up to trigger our xenophobia. When they presented, here's the perpetrator, everybody was ready to be mad at the Muslims because those Muslims are bad. So you have a question, and then we need to go to the remarks and rebuttals because you guys have lots of things to add to this subject.
You were speaking about media. 2 personal stories.
No, questions. Right now is questions.
Oh, sorry.
Pat, do you see any similarity between some of the other things we've discussed and what's going on right now with the U.S., NATO, and Ukraine regarding, say, the demonization of Russia and Vladimir Putin and the possible kind of propaganda set up toward building up a war fever?
It's possible. I have kind of shut my brain off to that situation, honestly. Same with the Malaysia flight. I don't know whether, one thing is a deflection from the other, or both are deflections of a third thing. I don't know. I honestly haven't dug into it. Okay, you guys ready to talk? Thank you.
You're going to sit down, Pat. Who wants to be first? Okay. Al, you got 5 minutes.
2 free DVDs for anybody.
5 minutes, right? I set rules for thinking because everything that we get involved in is so emotional in this world, and you have to get the emotions out of your mind because emotions, any degree, necessarily alter your perception of reality. And that's why I have little sayings for myself. To say that I believe it or I don't believe it, you're admitting you don't know. You're relying on a belief and letting that be a fact in your life, and that is very, very dangerous. I have this little mental shelf over here. If I don't know the answer to something, I put it up here until later I get more evidence, and then I may put it up again, whatever. As far as the JFK in the 70s, Geraldo Rivera had a Good Night America show, and he announced 2 nights in a row of forensic scientists analyzing the Kennedy assassination. It showed the Zapruder film, the car coming along. I was sitting with a friend. The first thing I noticed is that coming out from behind Kennedy's upper neck area was this streak of a gray mist that disappeared in the wind. And it was at a slight angle up, and I bolted out of my chair and I said, "Did you see that? That first shot came from in front of him below the level that he was sitting in that car. It had to come from the storm sewer." And she didn't see that, so they played it again that evening, and she saw it. I called up people the next day and I said, "You got to watch this, you got to watch it because this is really critical." The next night, that mist was erased out of the video that they showed. Okay, I went and picked her up and we drove down Elm Street, and the second of 2 storm sewer openings, drains in the curb, would be perfect for where that shot came from. Now, years later, I finished with a client at the courthouse and we were going to go out to lunch, and we were driving down there and I told him all of this, and I said, "You see, now here's the first storm sewer opening and there's no second one." They removed it. And I went and parked the car and got out and walked down there. They even made the concrete that they covered it up with look like old concrete. And over the manhole cover, they now have a lamppost. Years later, I played soccer for many years. I was with a friend on my team in a hot tub after a game, and we were talking. He was a sergeant on the police department. I told him about this, and he said, "Well, they told us that they removed that to quell speculation that a shot might have come from there." The city of Dallas, the state, the feds, that was one of the greatest conspiracies on earth, and it all hinges around several things. Kennedy had announced that he was having the Treasury print Treasury notes, and he was going to get rid of the Federal Reserve after he had announced to the college that he'd uncovered a conspiracy to enslave the entire population of the United States. He said he was going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. That alone is enough to get him killed. But there's so many things involved in that. I had a friend in the CIA, 27 years or so, and he told me in 1974 that World War III would be in the 80s. It would not be nuclear, it would be biological. It would be made to appear to be the natural outbreak of a disease. And the purpose was to eliminate black Africa and the subcontinent of India, and he was talking about AIDS. And AIDS broke out in Africa right where the World Health Organization was inoculating people extensively for all kinds of diseases. It all goes back to the banking system. You probably heard the Moriartys when they were here. The whole Libyan war was over the fact that he had a gold-backed dinar. What they're trying to do in Ukraine is get it into the European Union. And I think we're going to have a big showdown soon with the BRICS group, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now South Africa has joined them. They're going to a gold-backed currency. And I think we're going to have possibly, they're already rattling about possible wars. Gosh, there's so many things I could talk. Oh, Paul Wellstone, concerning 9/11, a very respected elder senator from Minnesota. And he was the one right after 9/11 saying in Congress, let's not rush to judgment. Let's not get emotional over this. Let's analyze all the facts before we go to war. Well, now that would have probably exposed the fact that that whole thing was a fraud. And so Paul Wellstone and his wife and daughter and the pilot and co-pilot of the airplane crashed on landing when he was out campaigning. And there was a saying around Washington, D.C., well, hey, don't get yourself well-stoned. There was a Swiss computer group that I'm sure some of you have heard of. They took some of the fastest computers in the world and started studying the composition of all the corporations basically in the world that amounted to anything. And it was just thousands, a couple of 100,000 corporations. And then they started analyzing all the interlocking directors and this and that and the other, particularly with banking connections. And it turns out that they determined that I think it was 127 corporations control 80% of the gross world product. And the international bankers are involved in that up to their ears. As far as that traffic light thing that you mentioned, that was very interesting. I had a friend who back probably in the 70s or so came up with the idea of applying for a patent so that these emergency vehicles could send the signal ahead and then it'd open up as green, you know. And he found out that had been patented in the 40s, and no one's ever done anything with it, which to me is crazy. Let's see what else. Building 7 in England, they announced the fall of Building 7 20 minutes before it happened on the news. That's right, that's recorded history. 20 minutes before it came down, they announced it in England. Pardon?
But the more important is 20 minutes before it came down, they were announcing that it had already come down, and they're explaining what caused it.
Yeah.
They're explaining what caused it, and that building is actually in the BBC's shot that they were sending out.
Yes, yes, I remember that. Yeah, in the background.
Right behind her.
Yeah. Yeah, go on the internet and look up Conan O'Brien, and he did this humorously. Somebody made a derogatory comment on the news about him. So he just went around and started taking the news clip of like New York and Seattle and St. Louis and Chicago and all over the country like this. And he would play this one and play this one and play this one after the other. And every single one of them were saying identically the same script. They're all given the same script to follow. And why do you think an evening newscaster who sits up there for a half an hour, of course it takes a few hours to get ready, he's got to learn to read that script. Why do they get $10 and $15 million a year? Because they are not about to tell the truth and risk losing that money. And when the Fed can print any amount of money for nothing, that's nothing to them. It's chicken feed. It's not even that. It's nothing. World Trade Center 7 only had very minor fires in it. You can go on the internet and find a steel frame building in Venezuela that burned for 36 hours and half of the top of the building looked like the Olympic torch and it didn't come down. These are the only buildings that allegedly, steel buildings, that have ever come down because of fire. Only the guilty destroy the evidence. You brought that out. All of these things like Waco and like Oklahoma City, they just destroy the evidence. The evidence at Oklahoma City shows that they had shape charges around the horizontal concrete and steel beams that cut them off like the end of a stick of butter. What else? I could go on. Oh, I have a friend in Dallas who was a Navy SEAL during the Vietnam War, and he was in a group where they divided them into teams. Let me just finish this one. Into teams of 3. And they were always assigned, all their missions were voluntary, and they were assigned only to go rescue downed American pilots. And they knew that all of the pilots they were rescuing were CIA pilots, and they knew, but they were Americans, and those were gooks, and so we're going to help out the Americans. They knew the CIA pilots were all carrying drugs. That's why the CIA was in that thing over there. The largest drug dealer on the planet is the CIA, followed by the Defense Intelligence Agency. I had a friend who used to come to some meetings that we went to that he was a pilot in a cargo plane for the Air Force, and he'd fly down into Central and South America, and he'd watch them load the airplane up with drugs. He'd fly it back to a U.S. Air Base, and he'd watch them unload it. And I had another friend who was in the Navy, and he was in Mississippi, Mobile. And they were unloading these aluminum caskets from Vietnam, and they dropped one time, and it opened up and didn't have a body in it. It had sacks of drugs in it. And they closed it up and put it on the shelf because they knew what would happen to them. But this Navy SEAL, let me quickly finish that. They were, when they needed more than 3 guys, they'd get more teams. And they requested, I think it was like 12 or 15 guys on this one mission right towards the end of the war. And their boss came to them and said, you guys don't need to volunteer for this one. One guy opted out, they put in another guy, and they went on it. They wore a helmet that had black velvet in it, so they got 0 light in their eyes for 8 hours before pulling it off in the middle of the night and bailing out of the airplane, and it gave them near night vision because the eyes were starved for light. They had one guy who knew where they had to go, and another guy knew where they had to go to be picked up, and they went into the area where they were to pick up the people, and they walked right into an ambush with about, they figured, I guess, 150 North Vietnamese regular troops, and they had a firefight. They figured they killed 30 or 40 of them, and I think it was 9 of the 12 were killed, and they were captured and put in a concentration camp, if you will, in North Vietnam, where they dug a hole, put them, each one in his own separate hole in the ground, put a bamboo grid over the top, and they stayed there for a month, making that hole their bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. A lot of guys died of diseases there, and there were other Americans there. Then every month they'd bring them out and let them go wash up, and then dig them a new hole, cover the other one up. Well, these people, eventually one of them was from Great Britain, and his people got their government in touch with the North Vietnamese government, and they got them removed and brought back to a military base in England. And when they arrived, he never heard from or saw the other 2 again, and they took him and they put him in a place, and they said, this is where you can sleep, and you can go over here and watch movies, and this is the PX, here are a few pounds you can spend, but stay out of these other areas. We don't have any orders for you, and you don't have any orders, so you're in limbo right now. He wrote a letter home, and they received the letter, and they thought it was somebody who'd picked up his ID or something, because they'd already been told by the United States government that he'd been killed in action. And so about 2 weeks later, an airplane flies in from the United States with MPs. They shackle him, march him on board that airplane, and it has no windows in it, fly him somewhere in the internal part of the United States, and put him in an underground prison where he stayed for like, excuse me just a minute. He stayed for like 30 days, and every day a man would come in and interrogate him, and he wouldn't answer one word. He'd just keep his mouth shut. And then after about the 30 days, another man came in and handed him an envelope with, I think it was like $200,000 in it, and said, you've been mustered out of the military, keep your mouth shut. I can't even begin to finish my list here, but this is a great presentation that you did, Pat, and I really appreciate it.
Okay, who's next? Come on up here. You got 5 minutes.
Oh, man. Albert, are you saying there's conspiracies? What was that? A list of stuff. Anyway, I'm going to get back to Pat's talk. That was excellent. I don't come from the same place as her mentally, but I am so glad she's on board. And I got some questions for the general public here. How many people thought this was special in any way, this particular presentation? And let's take you as the representative. In what way was it special?
So well done, so well documented.
What about you, Tom? What do you think? Okay, for me it's special for a different reason maybe, because it's a link between where I am in my mind and where you are. So, I'm going to try to go back to her thing. I'm not going to list all the conspiracies that I've entertained and investigated and got mad about. I'm already progressed to the point where we have to do something, and voting is not it. Remember this meeting tonight. Pat is kind of innocent compared to me because I've been immersed in this mess for a while. And you have the luxury, you all, including you, to think that you have to be comfortable in your mind to know, like, why, where, when, how. I'll use an analogy. If there's a thief in your house and he's going around murdering your brothers, and he's getting, he's stolen, the money under the mattress, and he's calling up the foreigners to come in and pillage the rest of you. You really don't really have to know why he did that. You need to stop it. Okay. Now, she also brought this thing, conspiracy theorists, skeptics, and debunkers. When she said, do we have any debunkers here, we had one debunker.
No, I just said, debunkers, I didn't believe that it was a conspiracy.
Okay, we have to probably define those words. But anyway, that's a little confusion here, but you all here, if you're not debunkers, then I'm going to use logic. This is going back to something Albert said. We enjoy our emotional relationship to these issues that we forget the disciplines of logic. There's logic's been worked out since ancient Greek times for that reason. People have agendas and they have debates and they always just want to win. And somebody came up with this idea that there's rules to logic. And it served us well. I mean, this is what mathematics is based on, and science is based on mathematics, and our whole technology is based on science, and our whole civilization is based on this, and it works. I mean, it's kind of magic. That's the new magic. You put your key in a car, and all this stuff happens. You press the radio, all this stuff happens. Well, it all came through logic, not through religion, not through what I want, not this and that. Now, logic's based on logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are ways that, especially conspiracy theorists, are real experience with this. They are attacked with very illogical arguments, and there's 100 of them. But one will be appeal to authority. So right away, even you say, I will always believe the official story first, and I will not believe the conspiracy theory first. I mean, that's an appeal to authority, and there's stronger and stronger versions of that. Then there's the ad hominem attack. Well, look at his father. What a deadbeat he was. Don't listen to anything he says. Well, it just so happens everybody might have a piece of the truth, and it could be important. Like if some bum says, "Hey, there's a truck bearing down on you," I'm not going to go through his pedigree. Why did he say it? Where did he get his shoes? I'm going to jump out of the way, maybe. So fallible as we are, conspiracy theorists, which I'm going to redefine for you all. Conspiracy theorist is someone who the mainstream media and the government, or whoever you believe in, your church leader, tells you is just insane. Don't listen to him. He's only going to take you to the devil. Now, I say that the only thing we have to get out of this is logic. Logic. I'm going to pose a logical thing to you. If this made any sense to you, and I'm glad you chose 911 because there's so much stuff going on, but 911 is really exposed, and the most exposed part is the cover-up. There's a couple of things that are super exposed. They cannot cover up the cover-up. When General says, well, you know, yeah, we had our plane sent over the ocean, or we had our plane sent up into Alaska. It's on record. It's there. It's on the video. And when the official report comes out, there's a date on that. Why is that 444 days late? Why is it Building 7 not in that report? Why does Max Cleland, who was a member of that commission, there were 12 members of that commission, say this is a disgrace, and he resigned? I mean, you know, this stuff you don't know. Why don't we know this stuff? Anyway, all those people that made that cover up, even though they might not be the highest up people, they are exposed. We need to interrogate them and arrest them if necessary and find out who told them all these lies. Then you have the people who made money on 911. There were people, not even abstract, they made money on direct, and there's direct financial connections. We have, with computers, we have money trails to the people who funded Mohammed Atta. He's supposedly the ringleader. There's direct financial connections. You know what the official report said? It doesn't matter who funded it, because there were box cutters. Then we find out that there were no box cutters. How do we know what happened up there? How do we know? Well, Susan Olson, the wife of Barbara Olson, the wife of Ted Olson, the Solicitor General, one of the top men in the Bush administration, that was his wife. Supposedly he got a cell phone call, and the FBI checked into this, and the cell phone call lasted 0 seconds. But he found out all about box cutters. Then we find out from pilots from 911 Truth that the black boxes send out signals that the cabin door was never opened to the cockpit. I mean, it goes on and on. Anyway, so I don't want to get off into details. However, here's my logical thing for you. If you are not a debunker, after you saw this, you're probably less of a debunker than you were. Has anybody changed their mind and more of a debunker? Then there's two ifs. The other if, is 911 important? If that's important, and if it's true, or if you need to know more about it, and we can accelerate that process, I ask, why don't you come to Barbex every Thursday night? We meet here, and we figure out how to make some progress with this. Now, there are people that have progressed very far, and there's a book came out called Another 19. It's rich businessmen that never sue the author, that their fingers on them. These are guys that made money on this. These are guys that profited in 100 ways, you know. And so that's where it is now. We have movies, we have books that show who did it. It might not be the highest guy, but these are fingers sticking out, and we're letting them go. We can't let them go. I invite you to come here Thursday night. We have a 911, North Texans for 911 Truth. Please show up and learn more. Thank you.
John 6, then you.
Well, that was very interesting, Pat. I like your logical thinking through. Let me explain. In England, you take 8 subjects, at least in my school, until you're 16, and it's O levels. So my history lessons ended when I was 16. After 16, you take 4 subjects. I took pure maths, applied maths, physics, and chemistry, and that sets you up for 3 years of college. Anyway, so my history ended in 1870. So what happened in 1870? Well, that's when Germany attacked France. So how did that come about? Well, it's called the Ems telegram. So what happened was that a telegram was sent from the French ambassador to Bismarck, and Bismarck adopted it. So he claimed they insulted the German nation. So that started the war. So basically, governments always lie, okay? You can never trust anybody in power. In fact, the only thing advice my father ever gave me, and he was in the soft furnishing business in London. I mean, he was the man you went to if you had money. So he knew politicians, movie stars, just about everybody. And he said, trust no bugger. That was the only advice he ever gave me. So now what I would say, yes, the other thing I've always noted is these very clever people at the top who conjure these things up, who start wars, it always backfires. Because Bismarck started the war against France. Guess what? He was amazed 20 years later when France, in terms of GDP, was accelerating more than Germany. Why was that? Well, they demanded reparations from France. France had to build factories. Okay, so that's why, now you take the Vietnam. What happened? Well, it was, Gulf of Tonkin, they went in. What was the end of it? Well, the end of it was America was walked out, was kicked out, okay? It went off the gold standard because so it was a disaster. So all these very clever people at the top aren't so clever. I mean, I went to a good college in London, but the cleverest people I ever knew were in my high school in London, really, and that's a fact. I mean, many of them became like head of the Cancer Society, commodities editor on Financial Times, people like that. I mean, they were really smart, okay? So, you look at these people like Clinton. He was a genius. He could do the Times crossword puzzle, listen to 10 people at once. I mean, and you look at what he did. I mean, yes, there is a conspiracy, I think, which is, well, anyone who thinks can see it. It's called the war on the American people. They're being duped and robbed blind by these people. And yes, you're right. You couldn't vote for anyone. In England now, there's nobody to vote for. They're all criminals and crooks, in my judgment. Same here. So how are you going to fix it? I do not know. But what I will say is that it always backfires. Now the CIA has run around the world causing havoc, but what has it done? Has it really benefited America? It was supposed to, it's helped the corporations, but in the long run, it's damaged America's credibility, democracy and freedom. Do people believe that anymore? They laugh at it, Now, what I will say is people outside of America know more about what goes on in terms of the CIA and its policies than people here, because people here have been duped.
Well, Pat's given an incredible presentation here. I'm really impressed and encouraged, and maybe it can help some of us who have been in this for a while look at the path she has etched from unbelief over here to actual knowledge. One of the things is, okay, where do we go from here? What is it all about? Well, one thing is just simply spreading the word, but there's another level to it as well, is studying the pattern of how these things work. Whenever government gets themselves when they paint themselves into a corner, they pull something like this. This seems to be the historical record. Recently, Obama said something that should worry us all. There was some question about something or other, and he said, well, I'm not as worried about, I think he said Russia, or was it Iran? I'm not sure. I'm not as worried about Ukraine as I am about a nuke going off in Manhattan. And that's worrisome for a number of reasons. If we study these events, we find out that they're often giving hints in the news, preparing, if you will, that's a double thing there, but preparing the people psychologically to go to the plan for conclusion where they're heading. Now, back, I think in about 2006, could have been 2007, Alex Jones was a speaker at a conference over in Fort Worth. And he's giving information there during that conference about the fact that he actually predicted not only the attack on the World Trade Centers, he predicted planes. And how did he do that? He did that because he was studying the pre-programming of the American people through the media. And it's going on again. And so if we take away anything from this, we need to be looking at what's happening around us and be apprehensible of this, of what might be coming next, because actually there's been a rather amazing record here of people with cell phones and little video cameras and so forth catching all kinds of embarrassing things, like at the Boston Marathon and some of these other events that went on, and basically catching the dirty work in process. And we need to be on our toes, folks. Thank you.
I'll be quick here. Pat, World Trade Center 7, Larry Silverstein, the Twin Towers. They were in need of removing the asbestos, which they estimated would cost about $10 billion. Either that or dismantle the towers. $10 billion to that. He put up $120 million of his and his partner's money, and that's how he secured the lease on that in the summer before 9/11. He also was raising his insurance payout, raising that in negotiations every day, trying to get that up and up. Okay, the other thing is, who benefits from the wars that we talked about? The countries themselves are, there's something bigger than that, and that is international bankers who do benefit from all the wars. A third thing I would say is motive. In the Kennedy assassination, who needed Kennedy dead? Well, the CIA, because he had a feud with those brothers. The Dulles brothers. And he was also threatened to dismantle the CIA. FBI wanted him dead because he had stuff on J. Edgar Hoover, and the FBI, Bobby Kennedy was investigating into organized crime, which J. Edgar Hoover denied it existed in America. The Cubans wanted him dead. FBI, CIA, let's see. Johnson would have probably been gone to prison had he not become president, because the stuff was coming out about his history and his past. So it was everybody needed him dead. Also the military, the Pentagon wanted him out of there because he wanted to pull out of Vietnam. We were already there, but the agreement that they wanted a big war. 9/11, what was motive? Motive was insider trading, it was money, it was hiding of evidence and all these other crimes. It was so that power, control, the Patriot Act. If it weren't for 9/11, they would never get away with all the successive wars that we've been in. They can always just go, 9/11, 9/11, okay, we got a war, okay, 9/11. They prepped us for that, all these subsequent wars, because of 9/11. Also, surveilling everybody for our safety and spying, all this, it would have never happened without 9/11. This whole post-9/11 world is a result of what they had planned. What is motive? It's boils down to about 4 different things. It's money, greed, okay? It's power, and it's control. It's power to control the world. It can control all of us. Greed, money, and power. So, and then one last thing is, you know, for 9 years, about 9 years ago, I turned off my television. I won't watch anything that's broadcast. I don't have cable. I will watch movies and I'll watch some TV shows when they come onto DVD. But anything that's broadcast, I will not watch, because about 9 years ago, when they were selling the Iraq war, I knew this was all bullshit. And I said, you know, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. And I want to set an example for others. You can turn off that TV. And especially when you realize that it's there to manipulate and brainwash you into whatever they want you to believe. Thank you.
You're next.
Thanks, I'm Gary. I didn't think Pat could do it. I mean, women are able to do these kind of things, right? That's what I'm hearing lately. I have a wife that's a professional engineer, so we've been fighting this for a long time. Okay. If nobody's read the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you might want to. It's kind of sets you up for how the world worked, and it is still working. My personal experience about the news was I moved here in '95, Martin Luther King Day exactly, and I heard a couple of, well, I'm sorry, I'm a little older. I was listening to some cassettes, and they were talking about terrorism and how you could bring the nation down. And they talked about our electrical grid and how you could take out transformers, and they talked about, well, you could put poison in the water, or you could just grow this stuff up and throw it on the freeways and stuff. Well, I hear on WFAA that the Dallas Water Department is being protected by the police because they think maybe a terrorist is there. So since I had just listened to this, I left town, went back to Beaumont, where I had lived before, got on my friend's computer Sunday, and looked back at WFAA. Well, there was the story, but there was no follow-up. So I called up the Dallas Police Department, and they said nothing happened. But you could see it on the internet from the from the WFAA, so I knew that they did the announcement, but they denied that it happened. So, you know, it's very well controlled. Then I had friends in Colorado that talked about a few thousand UFOs that flew over, reported very extensively. So I read every page in the Dallas Morning News for the next 3 months. I found one little bitty clip about this big about it. That's it. Totally, I mean, that should have made national news all over everywhere, and it didn't, but it was in the Colorado. So that's when I said, okay, we're really controlled pretty well. And then somebody said something about logic a while ago, and you know, my background is, I have a background in chemistry, mechanical engineering, as well as a massage therapist and other things. So I've got quite a bit of background. I think I've had 7 careers. But there's this thing called dark matter. And it's the part that we don't quite understand. We know it's there because when we start doing the calculations don't come out right. So there's about 95% of the matter in the universe we can't find. So we call it dark matter. That way we can just push it aside. So if you don't know 95% of what's happening, we have a slight problem. Logic requires knowing all the facts and being able to work through them and come up with a conclusion. When you don't know 95% of the facts, you're in real trouble. So logic, as well as I like it, and as many years as I used it extensively, thinking that was the only way, I would now say no. So if, I'm getting to there. Give me a second. There's a book by Lynn McTaggart called The Intention Experiment. Very well proven that intention causes things to happen. And I, as a massage therapist, have taken hands-on healing courses. And personally, I worked on this lady a number of times. She would have a knot that would come up right here. She couldn't hold things. She couldn't drive. She was incapacitated. Well, it all turns out that it's in the neck. And I could release the arms and then the neck, and that knot would go down, and she was okay for another 3 months. That works out real well. One night she calls me late at night. We're talking, 11:30, 12 o'clock. She doesn't want to come to my house. I don't want to go to her house. I say, I tell you what, just go sit down, go into a meditative state. She happened to be Jewish. And I said, you go into a meditative state, and I'll do the same thing. I hung up the phone, went into a meditative state, and thought about doing exactly the same thing that I always do. And in fact, I even put my hands out and sort of did it. I saw her 2 weeks later. I said, how'd it work? She says, just as well as you that were there. I said, well, that's great. And you know what the difference was? The difference was that when I worked on her, she paid me $60, and when I didn't, she didn't pay me anything. But that was the only difference. So it turns out if you look at the intention experiment, they actually have been able to set up computers around the world, and the computers will go crazy. They're running a program on it that gives you random numbers, and when the random numbers don't come out random, they know that there's a major incident going on in the world. In fact, when Princess Diana died the day before the computers went crazy. So it's pretty interesting. So it looks like the key to this thing is focus and intention. And if you can visualize in your mind, breathe it, smell it, taste it, feel it, of what you want it to be like, we have a decent chance of it happening. It's kind of like the 100th monkey theory, that when the 100th monkey got to doing the same thing, the other island did the same thing also at the same time. So keep your intentions like you want it to happen. We have a decent chance.
Just so you know, we're running out of time, so I'm going to let our speaker gets a chance now. First of all, I want to give our speaker a great hand for doing a great job tonight. Pat. I have nothing else to add to this. Everybody else has said what they're going to do, and I'm running out of time anyway. So we'll let Pat get up here and finish this off because we're going to be out of here in about 5 minutes. Come on up here. You get to comment on all these comments that are made and add whatever you want. So.
Thank you guys for listening, and I hope that if what I would like to see happen from this, because I intended this to be a bridge from those who believe, well, from those who disbelieve to those who believe, and hopefully you can take people who have an open mind and move them to be open to some of these things, because if in fact these horrible things are being done to us, we need to do something to stop it. We need to do a million things to stop it, and intentioning is a very important thing, and it may be the only tool we really have control of, and I've been pitching that idea for a while. And I will continue to do so. But all the other efforts that are being made to open people's eyes and just ask them to think, encourage them to look at the evidence and take just a couple of pieces that of the story that can crack the shell for them. For me, years ago I watched people watching the O.J. Simpson trial for months and thought, what are you doing with your lives? This is such a waste. I looked at it and said, the Bruno Magli shoes and the bloody glove, I'm done. That's all I needed, because the odds were astronomical that anybody else could have done it. So look for those kinds of things that are, and we have more DVDs. Thrive if anybody needs,
If anybody hasn't seen.
Okay, this is the Thrive Project, which kind of talks about all kinds of different
Solutions to the mess that we're in.
yes. So anybody who wants these, here. So continue to think about how, if you are a believer in some of these things and you do believe that bad things are being done to us, please talk to people that don't believe, just to wake them up and encourage them to be thinking about how can we solve this, how can we make a difference. And I agree that it's not going to, you guys have heard me speak before about using your votes. Forget the votes, that's not going to do it. I gave up on that. Firing Congress was a really good idea when I thought Congress had some power. They're all bought and paid for. So thank you all, and thank you for listening.
Just so you know, we're out of time, and we're going to retire to Starbucks down the street. Our speaker is welcome down there, and we'll buy her coffee or something, and that's it for tonight. So thank you very much. See you next week.
This is William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like us, or follow us, and get notices of all our videos. We love it even when you call. So when visiting the Barbex restaurant, tell them you want your reservation to the next College of